Okay. Hi, my name's Andy Sulak. I'm with Absence. I'm a solution specialist, which means tech guy. But I checked, and I only have one acronym in my presentation. Well, I think it's only one acronym. So, because I'm here to go through new infrastructure security, which initially when I heard they wanted me to talk about infrastructure security, I was like, great. I get just to talk about the fun stuff, the products, what you can put in place. And then they said, well, and we need to include strategy and cost. And that was a little bit of a, yeah, a little bit of a bummer, but it's okay. They go hand in hand anyway, so that's all right. So I'm not here to just throw a bunch of, 3, 4-letter acronyms, 4-letter words. I want to keep those to a minimum. Words like user and data and mobility. Well, I thought I was a tech guy. I'm not in accounting. So a little bit about me. So I've been in IT almost 20 years now. So long enough that I can refer to things as back in the day, but not long enough to be nostalgic about punch cards and disk packs. So that's kind of how I fit into the landscape. Oh, yeah. Thank you for dating yourself. That's very courageous.
29.
29. Oh. And how long have you been in IT?
29.
29 years. All right. Congratulations. So I've come up through the system side, engineering. I like to characterize my career as the first half working in, for financial industry, healthcare, then into startups and then consulting. The first half really putting together really intricate and sophisticated architectures, but never having them get off the ground because they were too complicated for the end users. So the second half of my career really focusing on, okay, if you want to put something in place, you want to put change in place, it actually has to be accepted and we need to get done. So that's been kind of a shift for me, which is why I'm excited to actually talk about not just the security products and what's available, or more the technologies. The products, there's plenty of people out in the vendor booths that can talk about the products. But more the technologies and then how you would actually take those, put them into a strategy, and then how you deal with cost on that. Okay? So, a little preview of what I'm going to go through. Obviously, I want to focus on the public sector. So, go through the mission and vision, security controls, what that means, how how we characterize those, and then the infrastructure security that's available today, some of the newest stuff that's come about. How you then assess the risk for your environment, and then work on determining the costs, how that falls into the layers of security, and then how you build a plan for it. Okay. So, mission statement. Who here has seen this before? Okay. So this is from the California IT strategic plan. And so I took this and ran it by a couple security engineers, security architect folks that I know well, and said, hey, when you read this, what's your response? And it immediately said, security's last. Which I thought about and I said, yeah, that makes sense in a way because you don't buy a car for the locks. You really want all the other features. You want to use it. It has to be a tool that you can leverage. And yeah, security goes along with it. So that makes sense. I will apologize up front. I'm originally from Detroit, so I tend to use a lot of car analogies. So then the next part of the strategic plan is the vision. So the first part, okay, make government transparent, accessible, and secure. Okay, so now security's, part of number one, right? But still, we want to focus on making sure that it's usable, accessible, and then it's as lightweight as possible. The user doesn't have to jump through a ton of hoops to do their job. But at the same time, we have to balance that with the security and ever-increasing security demands. Drive innovation and collaboration. So along with having that security, we still need to make sure that everybody can work together. And then make sure it's reliable and sustainable through the platforms and shared services. So now we also want to prevent or avoid as much overlap as possible, because IT has always grown up in silos. And as it's grown up in the public sector, private sector, there's really not a huge difference. It's come up in silos, so as divisions, groups, people want to work together, it becomes harder and harder for that. So how do we do that? Okay, so we have the mission, we have the vision statements. What does it take to actually have the security by today's standards that would be, we'll say, ample? Because there's no perfect security. It's, again, it's not a destination, it's a journey. So we can do that in essentially 20 easy steps. This is actually this is from the SANS Institute. So that's the one acronym, which is Systems Administration and Network and Security Institute. So at least I explained the acronym. It's their top 20 control points for an IT environment. So I'm not going to go through each piece of this list, but as you kind of look through this, sorry, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but it is 20 points. How many people think they have about a quarter of them covered? Like maybe 5 of them. Okay. Anybody have like maybe half? And I'm not saying I do. This is just for example. Anybody 3/4? Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay, I got to ask just because you said yes on 3/4. All 20?
Oh, hell no.
Okay, all right. Okay.
1 and 2, we don't have it all.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of the underlying point that I want to stick with for today, is that there's always a lot that you can do for security. There's always more that you can do, but it's going to be predicated on what's the best for your environment, what works for your users, what's right for your organization. Because, and I always get chastised for this a little bit, not everyone needs all of this. The security community hates to hear that. I get that. But I deal in reality, right? If we're going to talk about what's new and what's available on the security front, we also have to balance it with what can we actually do and what's important, because not every organization is a bank or a credit card institution. Those are the ones that we hear about, getting credit card numbers stolen, getting hacked. And then we have numbers that get associated with it. How much per record stolen is the cost of these breaches, okay? But that's really just one small section of security, okay, in the case of those records. So not everybody actually needs to do this. And again, for those that can hit the high numbers, how easy was that to get to? What's that? 10 years. That sounds about right. Again, I just want to congratulate you too, because I've actually never heard anybody usually go higher than like 12. So So kudos. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the new infrastructure security, we'll say technologies out there. First one's virtualization. And there's usually somebody that has an IBM background that says, well, virtualization isn't new. IBM invented it decades ago. And that's true, I'm not denying that. But the use of virtualization and the ability for us to virtualize at different layers, we can virtualize. Obviously, we've been virtualizing servers forever. We're still doing that. That's become more mainstream now. We can virtualize desktops, applications. We can virtualize networks. So we can create very specific boundaries with virtualization that we didn't have before. We had to do everything in hardware before, or it was only cost effective to do it in hardware before. Now with virtualization, it's a lot more cost effective to leverage the different flavors, if you will, on this front. And it's increasing more and more what we can virtualize, how we can control data access, how we can get users what they need, but prevent them from getting into areas that where we'll just say accidents happen. I'll be an optimist on that point. Advanced data loss protection. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and they mentioned about an account, or an email account within their organization that got compromised, and it got, essentially became a spam shotgun in the order of millions of messages in the course of a day. And so they said, well, it'd be nice if we could actually do something about that. It was like, well, they said, we'll just say they said something unfavorable about the user in this case, but said, well, there's actually ways that you can make sure that, or I'd say ensure, that's not guarantee, that by limiting the number of messages or actually looking at the data that's going out in, it could be, email is just an example, but making sure that data isn't just moving out of your environment. So data loss prevention systems used to be just, okay, whitelist, blacklist. Now, with heuristics and better analytics, they can actually be very specific and even search for patterns, things like that. Not only at the email level, but at the firewall level. Actually pretty cool stuff. It's really almost on the order of artificial intelligence. So that is available. Malware protection. So better malware protection, not just based on signature, which has been the case where we're reacting to what's already happened, but we can actually forecast what malware would act like. So instead of just being reactive, saying, okay, well, this hit in a number of organizations, maybe it was 10, maybe it was 100, maybe it was 1,000. They got hammered by this. So now we have a signature for it. Now it can actually be proactive in its protection. And malware now also includes antivirus, anything like that too. A lot of times it'll be teamed with data loss protection as well. Threat prevention systems. So intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, IPS ideas. Those are all the acronyms. That gets included in threat prevention. Much better today. So this actually reminds me of an incident that happened. This is probably, probably about 9 years ago. I was a system administrator for a healthcare company. And I was at work, it was late afternoon, kind of at that time when things are kind of calming down. And then all of a sudden, one of our network administrators ran over and said, your system is sending packets all over the place, what's going on? And we're kind of like, what are you talking about? We just put in an intrusion detection system, and it's just going, all the alarms are going off. It's going crazy. And so I looked at my screen, I said, yeah, we're testing some backups. It's like, oh, okay. So it wasn't quite tuned, right? Initial intrusion prevention systems were very touchy. Had to do a lot of tuning. But the good news, actually, follow on to that was shortly after we actually had the systems set up properly, got rid of the false positives, especially when we're running backups. And then actually, does anybody remember the SQL Slammer? Okay, yeah, good times, right? We actually were able to detect that and prevent that from occurring. So, and that was just even a couple months after that. So, and this was 8, 9 years ago. Nowadays, the threat prevention systems are much more intelligent. They're using better analytics, and they can correlate across multiple events and multiple systems. So it isn't based on whether you set it up properly. It can actually learn your environment, what's normal, what's baseline, and then what's kind of getting into the gray area and what would be more of a red alert. So much more advanced systems, which really do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to configuring security. Cloud encryption. So there's a ton of stuff I can talk about with cloud and cloud security in general. But cloud encryption is relatively new from the standpoint is that now, okay, when we talk about moving out into the cloud, there's been a number of organizations that have done it. There's been a number of organizations that have come back out of the cloud. Because determining what actually should be in the cloud, what shouldn't, what can you actually ensure once you're in someone else's cloud. So I'm talking about whether it's a hybrid cloud approach or a public cloud. Right? So being able to actually encrypt everything that you put into a cloud, and that's not necessarily just encrypting the operating systems or the data, but all the all the network traffic, what's being transmitted between nodes, really moving almost a secure bubble of your environment into a public or hybrid cloud is actually really exciting because now you can leverage outside infrastructures, which is what we want the cloud for, but we can still maintain control over what's ours. And that's been the issue, or we'll say one of the issues over the last couple of years is, great, you have data centers, there's scale, you essentially are doing compute and storage in bulk. But, you know, Mr. Service Provider, you don't necessarily have the same, you don't have everything at stake that I do with regards to my systems, my data. So being able to encrypt that is, I think, huge. It's something I was looking for quite a while, especially when I was in consulting and doing more server and desktop virtualization, because it was, well, you're virtualized, move it into the cloud. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, that's not you know, we don't kind of do this as a gamble. So, endpoint, application, and network security. So, you know, as we're going through the technologies here, you can kind of see each one sits at different layers that we'll actually go through a little bit later. And sometimes the best place to enforce security is at the endpoint, you know, at the laptop, desktop, whatever it might be, what you might be using. And depending on the skill sets that you have in your organization, that actually might be the best place to focus your resources too. So the ability to control based on who someone is, where they're connecting from, or a whole broad spectrum of other characteristics, what they can access, when, whether they're internal, whether external, connecting in. They can control not only the access they have from running applications, but also from network security. And you can do this without having to create separate firewall rules. So you can actually have endpoints that can isolate themselves based on who logs in. Things like that. Be very reactive, but still be role-based. So we can make sure that we can enforce the need to know or need to access people, get what they need for their jobs, but not just open it up for everybody. So. And then along with that, we extend, so endpoints, I'm kind of leaving out the mobile devices, even though they're still endpoints. I know. I just want to differentiate that. mobile device and application management. So who here is familiar with MDM, mobile device management? Okay. MAM? Okay. MCM, content. Okay. That was a guess. I actually haven't heard MCM before. But I've been in the acronym game for a long time. So mobile device management is the ability to take our nice personal devices, iPhones, Androids, Windows devices, and what's next, and wrap them so an organization can control them down to you can use the camera, you can't use these applications, you can't install anything. Which works when they're organizationally owned, right? So the division, the organization, the business actually bought them. They say, yeah, well, we're going to control them because these are ours. But if you're looking at any BYO initiatives, bring your own device. Because now people, they want to get the very latest iPhone, which just came out and is now shipping, or the next Samsung Galaxy. They want to use their own. But the issue with MDM is that it'll wrap it completely and control it completely. So I actually worked for a company not too long ago that I had an Android phone at the time. And I said, well, I want to get my email and use it for the company. I don't have an issue with that. They said, sure, you can enroll it. You just install this app. I said, great. And then I got the disclaimer, the agreement, which essentially, I'll sum it up as, you're donating your phone and we own everything on it. And we can do whatever we want with whatever's on it. So we can wipe it, we know what's on there, but this is my personal device. To which my response was, I'll take the corporate phone. And so that's been the standard, that's been what's out there. But mobile application management allows us to actually just deliver the secure email, deliver the apps, encrypt those, secure them, so that people can use the productivity applications, but it keeps their photos, it keeps Angry Birds and Fruit Ninja and anything else separate. And so if they then leave or want to use a different device, they don't want to use that anymore, we can just remove just the applications, the business applications, organizational applications, just the data, just the email, and leave everything else as it was before they enrolled the device. So more of a BYO solution than completely controlling it. So. Infrastructure and app security testing. So what does this mean? Who's heard of penetration testing? Okay, right. So basically you hire someone to try and break into your network, break into your infrastructure. Since more products, really more applications are the actual product. Now they can even do testing on applications themselves. So instead of saying, well, I need to basically create a boundary around my entire infrastructure and then I'll run the apps inside them, you can actually build and then test applications for security of the app itself and determine what needs to be changed, what needs to be remediated, and how that would work. Because the advent of this is the cloud, or really even before that would be more extranets, business-to-business networks, where it wasn't open to the internet, but you had business partners, other organizations that needed to share applications, share data. So you couldn't just secure your data center anymore because you had to kind of keep a side door open. So in this case, you can actually just secure the application and then test it too. So I thought it was kind of a natural evolution, but still a very, I'd say, current technology that's focused on where things are going, being more application focused. So it's not just mobile apps, but even just internal applications, right? Because we don't necessarily have servers anymore. From the perspective that we have servers, but we really have groups of systems that provide services, which forms really an application. So the application isn't just the software anymore, it's the stack that it rides on within an infrastructure. And then big data analytics. This is actually used across a number of these security technologies. When we talk about big data, I didn't really know what it was. I thought it sounded pretty cool when it came out. I didn't necessarily understand what it was initially, but it's the ability to take massive amounts of data and run analytics against it that used to take anywhere from a day to possibly weeks, because we're talking about processing terabytes and petabytes of records, but doing it almost in real time now, to the point where you can actually be predictive and you can get patterns and actually now forecast what's going to happen. So some of the big data analytics are used in threat prevention systems, malware detection, things like that. So you can use big data for a ton of stuff. It's usually it'll come up with databases, decision support systems. We have feeds and information from a bunch of different systems. We've got a lot of data, but we don't have any information from it. So the analytics that come out of it really is the information. We can use that on the security side too. So we can actually correlate network events with server events with permissions issues, and you can tie together, and actually from a intrusion perspective, you can actually follow where someone went, how they got in, and where they went, because you have little pieces of information throughout your environment, but the big data analytics actually allows you to pull it all together. So, very powerful tools. And again, so you can just put all this in your environment and everything will be secure. No problems. That's where my reality check comes in, where it's great to have the technology, it's great to have the tools, but if you can't actually put it in place, or if it's not really valuable, how are you actually going to get it funded, to be honest? So the first part of that is assessing risk. And the big question is, what do you have, right? I mentioned earlier that a lot of security events, especially the ones that we hear about, focus on bank records getting stolen, credit cards, things like that. That makes the news. But it might not be the actual data itself. It might be a service that you offer that's pretty important or critical, depending on the organization and the department that you're in. It might be the services. It might be internal services, external services. In addition to the data that you have, it might just be, I shouldn't say just, it might be records. It might be information about your customers, who you're serving. So that's everyone, not just Social Security information, but, well, any personal information. I don't even want to just say PHI anymore, because that was the big, with HIPAA, that was the big push. Now it's, bleeding into everywhere. And it's not just a matter of, hey, well, we're going to give it our best shot, because that was a standard. I was in the healthcare industry when HIPAA first came about. Everybody kind of worried about it, but from an engineering perspective, I was like, well, there's no actual guidelines, but there are now. So if you break the rules, it hurts. So really you want to determine, what do you have? Because you can take those 20 critical focus points, you can take the technology, areas of technology that I just went through, and say, well, we're going to put them all in place. But if you don't have, if data isn't even a critical asset of yours, then you might not have to do a lot of that. What's it worth to your organization, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, there's going to be some things that are more important than others, and you want to hit the high points first. What's it actually worth to the organization? Seems like a very simple question, but it usually gets answered out of IT. And to be honest, and I say this personally, that's probably the least qualified area to determine what the importance is. And I say that from all my times of getting yelled at by my internal customers across different industries, because it was just easy for me to interpret it. I had the data, I had the information, I had the systems that provided the services. Yeah, I knew how important it was. I knew how important it was to me. Wasn't always the case. What's it worth to external entities? So there's kind of a threat side to this as well as a customer side to this. What's it worth to the people that you're serving? But then what's it also worth to people that would have more malicious intent, right? And then that's going to determine, okay, how big of a risk is it? Is it a risk to lose it to someone that's going to use it for malicious reasons? Or is it more of a risk because our customers, the people that we serve, they can't do what they need to do? And then what's the priority of it? Again, how important is it to your environment? How important is it to your users? That's what we want to weigh this all against. So we can take the technologies, throw them in place, but I think, from the kind of the initial survey, we know we're not going to hit all the security focus points. And in some environments, it just doesn't even make sense. So then we roll into determining the cost. Okay. So for the cost, we need to look at, okay, what's the cost to recover from a breach, recover from an outage? Security covers not just loss, but just downtime too. Which, generally speaking, about 60% of that is usually just user-inflicted. But what's the cost to recover it? Or what's the cost to replace it? If it's something that is taken and needs to get replaced, can't be recovered, what would be the cost for that? Or the last part of it, remedying it. And when I say remedy, this is where we get into kind of a gray area, but a lot of times I'm referring to the litigious side, right? So if you're going to remedy a security breach that gets out in the media, it's not a matter of just recovering data. It's a matter of actually dealing with the press, dealing with a whole new set of marketing and image management, because that hurts. And when I've worked in the public sector, everything gets grouped under government. And everybody has this phantom idea of the government doing this or the government not doing this. And when I worked in the sector, I was like, oh, you mean the people? Just like everyone else? I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I just, when I still see that, I get not a kick out of it, I get kind of sick to my stomach, but it gets looped in. And then what's the cost of not just the technology itself, but the people involved? The people is a big part of this too, because when I was talking about what you're going to look at putting in place for security, you do have to assess the skill capital that you have, right? To be honest, what are you actually good at, right? So is it at the data center layer? Is it the application layer? Is it endpoint management? And focus on that first for security. Balance that against the other priorities, but make sure that that's what you're going after, instead of, to be honest, if you're light on networking, don't hit the networks right away. Do what you do best first, and then go from there. Well, the people encompasses, it's kind of just a small point in the middle of the slide, but encompasses probably the largest part of this. So it's the end users. It's educating them continuously, as well as understanding what they can do and what they can't do, what they're used to and what they're not used to. Real quick story from a couple years ago when I worked at Children's Hospital in Denver, which is now Children's Hospital of Colorado. We were rolling out a change to the electronic medical records system. And so I was actually going around, there was kind of a subset, there was a user group of providers that we interface with to say, hey, this change is going to be coming out, what's the impact going to be? which we didn't do initially in our lesson, and so we engaged a user group. And I met up with a nurse, Dorothy, who had been a nurse for 38 years. And so I was talking to her, kind of got into a lively discussion about, hey, we're going to roll out this new update to this module that's going to change this and this, it's going to move this around. And she would not have it. She did not want to change. Which to me, being in IT, it was like, well, that's, when things aren't changing, that doesn't seem normal. So we went around and around, and so we were actually sitting in one of the patient rooms. And so she grabs my arm, and then grabs a needle and says, well, let me ask you a question. I've been doing blood draws the same way for 20 years. If I change what I'm doing, I get in trouble and somebody probably gets hurt. So what do you want to do about that? And I said, well, to be honest, my immediate reaction is to hit the emergency call button, but then I realized that's just going to call you. So it's not really going to help me. But the point was, the people involved, their focus many times is doing things the same way every time. And that's the measure of success and quality for what they're doing. Something that I didn't really have respect for at the beginning of my career, but it's been pretty much the focus for, I'd say, at least the last decade. So very important to keep this in mind. And I think that gets, even in the conversations I've had over the last day, it gets easily lost. And, you know, the problem is there isn't just a pill that can be taken for this to go away, but it's a very critical fundamental point. So even though focusing on new technology that you can use to augment this, right? You can prevent mistakes, you can prevent accidents, you can prevent malicious attacks. The people are still important, and they're still the center point for this. And the processes go along with that. So I was talking about this a little bit before. Based on the layers of security, and this is a simplified model because there's always more layers we can come up with. You start with your data center. If you're good with the data center, if most of your data or your services are on the data center, then focus on the data center. If it's more about access in your network, then focus on securing your network. Again, depending on the services, applications, data, how that information travels, focus on that. Then the endpoints being laptops, desktops, any interface device, but outside of mobile devices, because of course that comes forward as well. So if you try to attack all these at once, good luck. It just, unfortunately, I've been in a lot of projects that have not only failed, but actually gone backwards because, you know, it's kind of the, you know, somebody gets burned once, they're not going to jump right back into it again. So you want to measure, again, what you have with what's important, with your skill capital, what you're good at, and then take the new technologies that are out there, which there's a whole set of vendors that can go into depth about what those are and how they would fit in your environment. But it's up to you to determine what's most important in your environment, what you have, because we can't just buy solutions, and you can't do everything at once, unfortunately. The last two slides, actually, between cost and assessing risk, these are actually points taken from, or simplified points taken from security IT project managers that I've worked with. Boil it down, I said, you know, let's leave kind of the project management ease out of it. What are the actual points that we need to focus on? That's where that comes from. And then build your plan. So we start with, again, identifying the risks. Inventory the assets. So that's your assets of what you're trying to protect as well as the resources that you have. The people, the existing technology. When you know, when in doubt, I always try to keep it as simple as possible, because everyone knows it's easy to get complicated. So keep it as simple as possible. Use what you have existing first. Hit the basics, get the foundation down, then go from there. Set your start point. It might not be starting from 0. It might be starting from having 18 of those critical points done. Again, that's amazing. That's your start point, then you go from there. Good news, bad news is then you repeat. It's an iterative process. You don't just say, okay, well, we've got security and we're done. It's IT. One of the greatest things I like about IT is that it changes, and one of the worst things about IT is that it's always changing. But most importantly, don't try to boil the ocean. You can't do it all at once. And as much as I've been in a lot of projects that don't start off this way, it moves in that direction very quickly. Well, since we're doing this, we also might as well do this. And okay, well, since we're making changes to this, then let's do this. Well, we can bolt this onto it, and then it turns into the Big Bang effect, which always ends up looking like a mushroom cloud versus a completed project. So that's what I have for you. Thanks for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm out there at the booth with the one with the coffee. Is probably the easiest way to identify it. So thanks for your time, and come on over and say hi if you have a few minutes.